Welcome to C Simple Podcast. We focus on providing simple solutions in the classroom. I got my sister Laura with me today, coming from the UK. I love how that.
Hello.
What's up?
Hey, how you doing?
How you doing? I'm just super happy to have you on the podcast again. You know, you definitely were dropping a lot of gems, and we just really just had to have you back. So thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Excellent. And so, our last conversation inspired me, as far as just really loving how meticulous, how you pay attention to detail, your ability to really reflect on, just your expression, if that's your words or through writing. I was like, yeah, we definitely got to come back and really do not just a regular podcast, but like a book podcast and talk about something that is very meaningful to me, which is Black empowerment, and not only Black empowerment through economics. So we came here to talk about a book full of gems, right? What's the name of that book, Laura? What's the name of the book?
Powernomics.
Okay, there we go. It's right there, right?
Yeah.
The Dr.Claud Anderson. He's an educator, right? He has an EDG. He brings a different perspective, right? Powernomics is an action plan for Black Americans, and Black people of the diaspora all over, because this could definitely be transferable information. And he gives the readers a chance to follow racism to see how far down the rabbit hole it goes. When you hear that, do you agree or disagree that he does that?
He does. I think so far we're going to be reviewing today chapter 1, and chapter 1 has been like an eye-opener. It provides with a lot of figures. This book was written in 2005, so there are like some things that I had to update myself to see that was actually almost 15 years or more. Let me see how the figures, if they have changed or not. And that is something that it has been very interesting for me. Also, living in London, it gave me the opportunity to check the numbers here in the UK. And I will tell you more about what is happening in Europe. But it's certainly very interesting. It really opens the opportunity to have a conversation about how we can empower our communities and build our communities and make sure that for once we're going to push through the ceiling, that we have been living under.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And that's empowerment, right? He talks about not just doing stuff that makes you feel good, but participating in things that empower you. Empowerment is completely different from just me giving you an amazing speech. Empowerment is me giving you the gems, giving you the tools so you can better your society economically.
Exactly. I think one little criticism I will do about the book.
Let's go.
It is that, with these type of books, because so much information, I will expect it to have more notes, like footnotes, but the book doesn't really have until the last part of the book where you can see what are the sources. There was something interesting for me, for example, when he started talking about race and how that was constructed.
Yeah,
it is not accurate. And I'm like, damn, Claude, who gave you this data? Because one of the things he says, race is coming from the word. No, it's race means race, you run and it's a race of wealth. And it doesn't come from that word. And I think this is me because I do know Spanish, and that word was coming from Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. And I was like, no, that doesn't mean that. So the initial word was ras, and it meant the head of or origin, and it was based in the quality. So it wasn't really related to wealth around that time. I mean, if you can put it in that context, because back in the days we were talking about for example, the heads meaning the number of camels or horses. That could be seen as the origin. But in this context, it is giving too much power to British, and they didn't started slavery, right? It was started with the Portuguese and the Spaniards. So I think like that part, I'm going to be honest, it put me a little bit off when I was reading. I was like, okay, I really need to double check, because even though Dr. Claude is someone who has a lot of knowledge, you know, sometimes the information that we get, it can be very narrow, and it can make us to be misled of like what is the origin of a word in this example. And that is something that caught my attention. No, a lot of people would be able to get that, except if you do know because in Spanish or in Portuguese, it's called carrera, which is totally different from raza, which is race. And that was something that I learned, that maybe back in the US, is being taught that it means race, but you have to put that in you know.
Let's cite it. He says it. Can you go to that? So I'm looking at it. It's page 1.
It's in page 3 of the book.
I'm going to say page 3. I'm sorry, where it says race, racism, and wealth. And so I'm thinking he's saying race is about financial, political, and social currencies, is the form of store wealth and power. Trying to get to the point where he talks about okay, here it is. The prize for winning the race was the power, right, to develop Western civilizations using the wealth extracted out of Africa. Black people were non-competitors in the race. They were prizes. So they could neither play nor win. And so you're saying that essentially it's he might have some accuracy in that, but you're like saying that it's more to it, or it's just completely inaccurate, and that
it is inaccurate, and especially because in that century, when Africans were labeled as Black, you know, you were stripped out of like your identity totally. You are like put the label of Black. Around that time, we were not considered people in the eyes of the, you know, of the oppressors, colonialists. We were not considered people until way later around almost the same time that it was the United Nations letter of like human rights, or like a little bit before. So we were not acknowledged as people. That's why race in that particular word, they were not considering that they were like trying to compete against us. They were not even seeing us as any type of like competition in the future.
Got it. Oh,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and that's the beauty of just cross-referencing when you read something, right? You always want to take something with a grain of salt if you definitely, you know, if it doesn't seem correct. I love it. So let's get into where it says race without a finish line, okay? So excluding the race, actual race part, he says true racism exists only when one group holds a disproportionate share of wealth and power over another group, then uses those resources to marginalize, exploit, exclude, and subordinate the weaker group. And then he goes into talking about pretty much that it's about power. Racism isn't an individual thing, right? You know, you can have someone who is racist towards you, right? But he kind of puts it in a prejudice type manner. But if you're white, then you have certain privileges that allow that prejudice to become racism, and literally, you know, be very, very not only detrimental to you, but can be detrimental to your overall image. And then he goes into talking about how Black people can't be racist because the power is the complete opposite. We don't have the coalition, we don't have the organization to put systems in place to change the color of someone on a magazine to create this construct of anti-Blackness. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with what he said, and I think sometimes it's quite difficult to discern when someone is being a racist or when someone is going to be xenophobic. It's very difficult because it's a very thin line, right?
Yeah,
so racist implies superiority, or like believes that you're superior because you're race. and xenophobic means you just hate someone because it's different to you. It's not like you think you are superior, you just dislike them for their culture, the way that they speak, their skin color is a little bit more different. I think when he's mentioning that, obviously, we do not have a lot of examples around the world where Black people is superior in terms of like wealth. Right. I think like the only country that we could mention will be South Africa today. However, South Africa today, the wealth remains still in equitable white people. So can they believe that they are superior? Barely, because they are still fighting against like that legacy. And I think that's very important. Now, we can see right now, and I think like we have been experiencing that, especially like in the recent years, we can see like how there like is an imbalance in the community. We can see now that for example, people who are light skinned or like mixed heritage are blamed for like, no, you are not Black. So there is some part of in the Black community that they are pushing other part away, when before, and I think when he was writing this book, it was saying like, well, anti-Blackness, you have to claim your Blackness. And now there is a group saying like, no, you don't claim your Blackness. And I think we will talk about that again. But it's just very interesting that right now in the world, there is no a country where Black people is superior than, even though when they are the majority. And that is very sad and scary.
And he says in the burden of inequalities is that pretty much when you're talking about race, Black people are distinctly significant when it comes to that. When you're comparing it to, say, other marginalized groups, like you mentioned, and other actions like xenophobia, Black people, right? He says these groups have not been customarily lynched, castrated, exploited, and denied the fruits of their labor. Blacks are the only group of people forced to practice capitalism without the capital in the richest and most capitalistic nation and on earth. And I did read chapter 2 a little bit. It's so funny, man.
You cheated.
I read it though, man. And it's amazing what he talks about. He says that this concept, it was kind of created from Darwinism and the survival of the fittest mindset of that everyone starts at the finish line, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's a name for it. He calls it the Horatio Alger myth. Gives the impression that Blacks alone are responsible for their failures in American society. And that's how you get you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The white culture scripts justifies their racial exclusion and exploitation and the abuse of Black people as an official, pretty much out-group. And they justify these negative images by saying, oh, look, you're lazy, without constituting slavery, without constituting Jim Crow, without considering all these things that have literally not even put us at the line. We're like further behind the line, and we're forced to think that we're equal.
Yeah, I think coming back to the burdens of inequality that you mentioned just before, it was like the reference to the figures, and I just double check if it has been any type of improvement in the US and what it is right now in the UK. And it says like approximately 38% of the Black population is beneath the poverty line. 38% was around, and it's like it maintained that number through the 1960s to almost 2000s.
Yeah.
It seems, which I'm gonna say, it seems that it has been a little improvement. And now the total population of black people is like 23.9% beneath poverty line. Is that true? I don't know. Maybe it is true, because we have a couple of more billionaires. We have Kanye now, we have P. Diddy, and we have Jay-Z. So maybe they are pushing, you know, like it just take a few people to push the line, but in reality, maybe those numbers, they don't reflect what is happening in the population.
Yeah.
And after COVID, we will see.
Yeah, definitely after COVID, because the wealth gap definitely got wider, especially with all these tech companies, you know, that definitely benefited from the pandemic. But he says pretty much, he says today more than 100, excuse me, he says black people in America, either full slavery, black owned 0.5% of the nation's wealth. And he says more than 140 years later, we still only own that percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just, and then you say that 38% is beneath the poverty line, and there has been some improvement. And I love that you started with criticism, right? Because I think criticism is just, it's pretty much how we learn. This book is used in the conscious community as a staple, believe it or not, especially in America. If you're talking about any conscious topic, Powernomics is generally like that fundamental book. But unfortunately, what happens is the concept is that economics is going to just automatically save us from racism. It's going to automatically save us from white supremacy. And and you have people that are literally using this book and saying that you all haven't done nothing, right? You haven't
Right.
achieved anything. They'll use that statistic that I just read, because there is validity to it, right? But there's also gray area, and that gray area is important for us to acknowledge, so we can really appreciate the people that are really doing what we do. Because people will say, we haven't gotten anywhere, so what are we doing? What have these elected officials have done? And it's so disrespectful.
It is, especially in the US, seeing like how racism has penetrated every level of the institutions, from health, justice, penitentiary,
Yep.
education. So how a community can get rid of that, you know, that country has been built that way for a reason. And coming back to the UK, which they, you know, and I think like he touches this here when he breaks down like what happened during the time of the independence. In the UK, for example, 46% of the Black population is beneath the poverty line. 46% is way higher than it is in the US right now. But not only 46%, is that 32% is ethnicity mix, which it may be still what will be considered a Black household in the US, which we are talking about like 70% of the population, or like maybe let's go a little bit down. 60% of the Black population is beneath poverty line.
Wow.
That is scary, and people doesn't understand and doesn't acknowledge, because what he said on the book about like being a blind world, blind color, he says colorblind, being colorblind. This is exactly what is happening in this country, especially in Europe, where there is no differences between white and Black on paper. Right. Because we don't have to really reflect our race on it. So then it doesn't exist poverty between Black and white, because there is no track records. And that is something that you guys are doing very well. You are able to identify what are the pockets where like Black people or like any other ethnic minority are overrepresented. So you can put like an action plan. The problem is that the action plans are not being put in place. However, here, there is no acknowledgement or awareness regarding this situation. So that's why a lot of time I say like, well, the US is better because you're able to have an open conversation and you have the data. The UK is like, code with like sugar code. So you don't really see what is happening. I think like that was like very interesting for me to see like how the numbers, they were different.
Let's go. And what you go ahead. Yep.
No, sorry, what you mentioned about like the what we have not done, why we are still here. And he mentioned that was maldistribution of wealth, inappropriate behavior patterns, and lack of national plan empowerment. I think like that was the last three things that he mentioned on chapter 1. And maldistribution of wealth, well, it's nothing to do with it's nothing to do with us.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, absolutely. I think he's. So he says the white society committed only to $15 billion to the war on poverty. Since this program included every group in America, it is unclear how the limited efforts was supposed to correct centuries of abuse and inflicted specifically on Black people. So I think he's probably taking a shot at like the leaders and the politicians during that time. $15 billion, right? You know, that's not, you know. And then you talk about inappropriate cycle. So what do you, inappropriate cycle behavior patterns? Wait, actually, no. Going back to what you were saying, I mean, yeah, it's not our fault. I mean,
the maldistribution of wealth, it is really impossible for a minority to fight for it. How? I mean, you are not the ones who are holding the budgets in the States. You are the ones who are paying the taxes, but you are not holding the budget. And that is when he mentioned, like, even though, I don't know what page is it, he was saying, like, even though everybody start like working like in different type of like jobs and everything, it wouldn't make the wealth that should be represented in the community.
Absolutely.
And that is something that I have learned spending time in the States, that a lot of people in the community, they decide to be an entrepreneur because that is the only way that you can do it. Otherwise, if you're going to work for a corporation, it's very difficult because it's designed for you to not be seen, for your talent to not be rewarded. That is shocking.
And it's overwhelming too. Dr.Claud Anderson is very jaded. I'm gonna be honest. He's very jaded, but I appreciate everything that he has gone through. He's very, very reasonably so for him to be jaded, for sure. But I mean, yeah, it's very overwhelming, absolutely. And ironically, he says during the same years, the nation spent $120 billion on the war in Vietnam. Which was 8 times larger than the amount spent on the war of poverty. Hidden behind, yeah, go ahead.
Was Afghanistan the most expensive war, or Iraq?
Yeah, it was pretty expensive. I know it was expensive for sure.
Because I think like this was written before that happened, so maybe you have another one.
And then he also brings up, he says, hidden behind the facet of a colorblind society, racism in the 1970s became politically incorrect. And so what you're saying is that the UK, it's kind of in this benign neglect where if something like a racial issue may pop up for a particular group, it may just completely just, neglect it, act like it, didn't exist. And America was in a point like that as well. During like the 90s and early 2000s. But then we had, unfortunately, police shootings, Barack Obama, white rage, having all these catalysts that kind of caused us to think about, why are we not acknowledging these things? These things keep happening. Let's bring attention to it. And I think you all probably are in that process as well. It just, hasn't happened yet. I don't know.
That's a good point, because I think around that time in the 60s, when you guys were having the civil rights revolution, the UK and other countries were still colonizing other countries in Africa.
Wow.
So it has been a change between we are trading people during like 3-4 centuries to we are gonna trade goods, we're gonna get territories, we are going to like scramble Africa and make it and divided it. So what happened is that when you guys were like pushing the agenda, the agenda in the other part of the world was totally different. The other day, well, I think it was this summer, Nigeria celebrated the 40th anniversary of independence. 40, I think it was 40. I'm 34. So that was yesterday. I mean, I'm still a baby. That was yesterday. I was like, wait a second. You guys have been mentioning democracy and all that, but at the same time, you were in other people's house robbing, and you still are. And I think, and that is the part like it really annoys me, is because people think about, oh, slavery. Wait, that started there, but it didn't finish. And I think the acknowledgement of like it didn't finish there is like you see it yesterday, you see it today, where are still happening things like that, but there is no awareness. And I think our conversation needs to go beyond that. So for people to really understand like what are the repercussions of those actions. You cannot be colonizing a country, destroying everything, and then expecting them to be like one power economy. How? Well, actually, Nigeria was almost there a few years ago. But how you do that?
Excuse me. Yeah, it's the most disrespectful thing ever, right? And it's like it's a slap in the face, because it's just like, here's $600 during the pandemic, you be all right. Here's $1,200 for stimulus check, you be all right. It's just like what world do you live in, man? Like,
Coming back to that, you know what happened here in the UK? They sent.
Yeah. I think
you hear about that?
They asked for the money back.
No, they sent a box with food for students, and the box had like maybe 4 slices of cheese, 2 bananas, some bread, and that is what the kids have been receiving from the government, because the government, instead of like trusting people and giving them like £30 a week or whatever was it, they decided to pay a company to organize those lunches. People was like, wow.
Oh,
I'm like, how are you surprised?
Really?
They don't know.
Wow.
Incredible.
And it goes, going back to the book, it's just like, there was a point in time where they thought we weren't human, like thought we were property. And our property is what got them their wealth. And that's the wealth they passed on to their kids and their kids' kids. And that's how we have, unfortunately, this huge gap that Claude Anderson talks about. I'm
gonna tell you a secret that I realized not a long time ago. My family back in Spain, so they are white Spaniards, and they were, my uncle was working for a bank that was called Hispano-Americano, and it was acquired by one of the biggest banks in the world, that is Santander. That bank was really called Colonial Hispano-Americano, and what it was doing was like bringing the assets from the Caribbean, Latin America, and in not really in the States, but bringing the assets from the colonials where like was actually from the slavery labor, bringing to Spain. And what they were doing is like laundering that money, creating like roads. The industrial revolution that was happening in Europe was based in the money that was being used, that was brought from slavery, right?
Yeah.
In that part. Yeah. So my then I started like counting generations. That was only 4 generations ago. So it was my dad, my grandpa was working for that bank. My grandpa's grandfather, no, a father was working for that bank, and my grandpa's grandfather was like actually fighting in the Caribbean for in Cuba to maintain the colony of Cuba. So it's not a long time ago. That is only 4 generations. My grandma is still alive. So it's not, you know, and it goes back, but people doesn't know. And this is me doing research. Like how that, but they were only employees, right? They were not having any wealth.
Power.
They were employees of those banks. And this happened right now. You see a lot of people that they work for their banks, and the whole family works for that type of company, corporation, and they benefit.
And that's why racism is a structure, right? It is a system that tells you that you could benefit from the system if you just do these little bitty things, and your kids could benefit from the system if you do these little bitty things, right? And then what happens, that color blindness, even though it's a myth, right? It's like a I remember when Donald Trump got elected, they started making up words. It's like say like alternative facts. It's a damn lie, right? If you believe the lie so much, it becomes true. Right? And you pass that lie down from over, and then the only way that you can get out of that lie is if you get some help psychologically, right? Or if you're acknowledging that you are perpetuating white supremacy and your family or your heritage, you want to, okay, now I got to sacrifice and give it, you know, and give up some of that wealth, right?
But it is very important is how identity plays a role in all this. Because when you are stripped out of your identity and being called Black, you never can trace whatever wealth you could have in history. And we're talking, this has been happening for the last, it's just 4 generations. It's not, or like 5 sometimes. It's not that much, you know, and it's very important. That's why it's very important to know who we are, where we're coming from.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that he was mentioning as well was like wait, let me say it right. Non-white Spanish speaker or something like that. He made a difference in the category of Spanish speakers. And I think it's very interesting because right now what we are seeing is that in the Latino or like Spanish speaker community, they also have colorism.
Absolutely.
And the ones that they are, you know, that they own Miami, that is the truth. You see a lot of people, if you go to Miami, you see a lot of people of color, different. But the ones who actually own Miami are not on the streets. It's like white Cubans. They do have like, you know, and they are Spanish speakers. They have like people from Venezuela as well, Spanish speakers as well. But those that they are coming from African descent, they don't own anything. Why? Because when you immigrate to Cuba, from Cuba or to Miami or like from Venezuela or Colombia, these people, they can claim their heritage. So it's very easy for them to go and say like, oh, I'm Spanish descent or whatever descent. And then they get the passport. It's very easy. But when you are coming from African descent and slavery, where are you going? You cannot really claim anything. And that is one part that we don't acknowledge, but it is true. It is another type of advantage that people has, that I do have it because I'm Haitian. So as far as I know, I still able like to claim like my Haitian heritage, and I'm also European. But African American, no. Wow. And that is like African American or like any community in Latin America that is descendant from African, what can you claim?
That's that. I think that's also why you know, Pan-Africanism is super important. You know, because it brings a lot of things full circle, and it lets us know that, you know, our connections are just as important as our differences. And if you can relate to the struggle, then then we can do something with that. I love
Mm-hmm.
this. How you feeling? How you feeling?
Good. I think we have two more points to really talk about before we go to chapter 2, but I haven't read chapter 2, so I can't talk.
Yeah, you good. So I have some stuff about the monopolies, and then he talks about pretty much white ice being colder, avoiding blackness. He's talking a lot, about just why these inequities take place. He said,
Mm-hmm.
so the population one I thought that stood out. So he said pretty much blacks are only 12% of the general population. They are outnumbered 7-1 by a shared white majority that is 87% of the population. This means that whites can override blacks at least 7 times, making it impossible for blacks to take over anything. Moreover, with the exception of entertainment, blacks do not exceed 1% of ownership, control, and representation of anything positive in American society. It is critical skills professions such as doctors, lawyers, architects, engineering, scientists, judge, physicists, business owners, wealth holders, electors. Blacks never exceed 0.5%.
And something that he also said about until around like 1960s, that there was a zero black policy, that no one from black heritage could actually go into the US. I never heard about that before. Like they couldn't immigrate in the US. And that was something that is scary.
Mm.
That's very scary.
You want to look at the charts where it explains the wealth gap?
What page?
18. All you gotta do is look at one column. Just look at percent greater than black. That's all you gotta look at. So pretty much he's comparing the pretty much multiple industries for black people, multiple industries for white people. He's comparing the revenue, I'm assuming, or just the wealth. And if you look at the percentage greater than black, they're all like 4 figures higher.
I saw when it was talking about finance, I was like, wait, the financial institutions.
18, 19. So you see it where it says greater percent than black?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you see the figures? They're all 4 figures.
And you see stocks and mutual funds, 20,400% greater than black. And you saw what happened this week with Robinhood, the app, and the stock of like Game is designed for this to continue the same number.
Wow.
That's why they close it. It's not, I mean, don't take me wrong. I don't think it's designed like, it's designed against black people. I don't think it is, what happened this week. It's just designed to keep themselves richer. That's it.
Yeah. The middleman. I mean, the little man doesn't get any peace. And
exactly. And it happened that the little man is black.
I mean, think about like the congressmen who, they traded their stocks like right before the coronavirus,
The Atlanta woman? No,
yep.
Georgia?
Yep.
Damn.
But look at these numbers though. It's flabbergasting, It's equity in homes, 2,000%. Real estate, 4,000, almost 5,000%.
There is nothing less than 1,000%. Like we're talking about 1,000% being a normal number, Like we're not talking about 85%, 60. We're talking about like like 6,
bro. That's
it's
crazy.
like he's choking.
That's crazy. And then so I love the monopolies section because he pretty much just talks about just these systems in place that literally keep us in this wealth gap, right? The media, right? He talks about how just the media portrayal of black media is it just kills us, it it allows us to feel that we, excuse me, it allows us to hate our culture, right? It causes us to live out of our culture sometimes, right? And
You
it
don't feel like something is changing now with social media? You don't
so
think like it's a little bit of empowerment here?
oh well, I'm talking about in his case. Yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
speaking.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about just in his case. So as far as so for example, when we had the riots, right? When they had Rashad Brooks killing in Atlanta,
Atlanta.
it was another one as well. I mean, when I say the media, I'm talking about like Fox News. You know, I'm talking about like the
Yeah.
dogma, the ones that is causing this disease to continue, and
Mm-hmm.
and literally, oh boy, he's shooting. I mean, he's tweeting. When the looting the shooting starts. And the media, they Twitter didn't, they didn't say, for example, they it had to be an insurrection for them to realize the overall disease of what he was about. The
Mm.
media puts themselves in the dirt so much they don't recognize the trauma that they're putting on people with some of their messaging. Even like I would say that the media was a part of Donald Trump getting elected because they gave him the space to do it. I remember when I was watching him before he got elected. It was comedy. I was just like watching his speeches, and he would literally say the same thing over and over again. But because he got a bigger following, the media kept pushing it and literally asking, like, is Donald Trump white racist? Having
Mm.
is Donald Trump a misogynist on CNN? It's just like, why are we wasting time on this? So now I'll take that same mindset and put it in a benign neglect society, put in a society that's colorblind media, like
Right.
it happens maybe not on a national level as we did, but it still happens locally. It happens in local Detroit news when they come on the news and they just start with all this negativity, and
Mm.
it seems like it's biased.
I think it was very interesting before Trump went into election. Trump was great to create content, easy content. You could like talk about whatever he said during 20, 30 minutes, the whole afternoon. It didn't matter. And I think that exposure that Trump was given by not only Fox, but CNN,
Mm-hmm.
that was the biggest enemy of America. It was because he was reaching every crazy person in the country and beyond. Because here we have seen people like supporting Trump, not that many, but I think like you are right. In the other part, it's like when I was there during the lockdown, I saw like CNN, for example, going ham, like they were going against Trump, like
Yeah.
literally it didn't matter. Now, for me, I don't have, by the way, I don't have a TV for the last 11 years. So I don't watch TV.
I
I
believe.
don't, I just like, I have my computer, I have my phone, and I choose and I read news, like, and I'm very, I what I know is because I choose the sources,
Mm-hmm.
and that is like what it gives me the freedom of like thinking, because I'm not all the time bombarded about like certain type of like messages. But what we have seen with like Trump, it was very similar to what happened with Hitler. Hitler
Yeah.
was like talking shit all the time,
Yeah.
and he was reaching way too many people that were desperate.
He was he was sent to prison for treason because he tried.
Hitler.
Yeah, he tried to overthrow like the government, and he went to prison for it, and then he came back and ran as like a Democrat, I believe, because Germany was going through a depression. Like a potato was worth $1 million or some shit, right?
And I think like we see the same components of like this dictator, which, and also another thing that it was like very interesting when I hear people say Antifa, I'm like, wait, but being Antifa is not that good thing because you're against.
You'll get fascism, absolutely.
And I'm like, that is what everybody should do. And that was like very, very interesting. And I think like a lot of components that we have seen in history, they keep repeating and recycling to what we have right now. So
this book right
what is
here,
that book?
this book is called On Tyranny. It's called 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. It's the founding fathers try to protect us from the threats they knew, the tyranny that overcame ancient democracy. Today, our political orders face new threats, and not unlike, pretty much it talks about all the dictators and how they were like, you know, similar, you know, and it talks about, you know, pretty much the lessons we learned. Talks about we are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experiences. So it talks about the 12 biggest dictators. It's called On Tyranny. You should check it out.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. This is beautiful, and I wanna stay in the monopoly. So let's go to page 22. Go to where it says political judicial monopolies, and it says all the way at the bottom. So this is the laws, right? Because you know, we had to pass laws for white people to treat us like humans. You know what I mean? We've had to pass, because Stokely Carmichael said that civil rights law ain't for me. That's for you. I already knew I was free. I already knew I had my rights. I already knew, you know, that's for y'all. You know what I mean? And he says right where it says credible conservative. So it says several justices were appointed when there were two litmus tests, and you can tell me if you believe this or not. For any appointment to the Supreme Court justice, they have to be credible and have conservative views, and the willingness, I can't say that word, to avoid using the court to correct historical injustices, especially those committed against blacks. So pretty much he's saying like they hire people to make sure these inequities stay in place. He says in the book, Up from Conservatism, shared a story that illustrates how bias against blacks is institutionalized in judicial monopoly. He says, order ways for polling place. Well, I think I'm trying to get to the. Consequently, judicial monopolies control the fate of blacks in ways that rarely beneficial. Research supports this premises. As late as the 1990s, nearly 60% of whites, Hispanics, and Asian Americans continue to perceive black people as inferior, undeserving justice, and innately criminal. And if you watch DuVernay's 13 Netflix special, it talks about, you know, how we put that criminal tag on black people, and it puts us back in that slavery 3/5 of a human perspective.
Yeah, and I think when I watched 13th, I think it's like 2 million of the black population is in jail in the US.
Yeah.
So hold that number. If you do 2 million of the population is in jail, 23.9% is beneath poverty line. How
can you
how you can be accountable? And I'm saying you because you're in the States, I'm not. But how you can be accountable for that? Like, what are the tools to be able to break that circle? Barely. Because that 23.9% is a part of the population that is in survival mode. Yeah. It's not time to, like, you know, organize and to go to, like, it's very difficult.
So what Biden's trying to do right now, he's trying to pass an act. I think it's like the People's Justice Act, and essentially it's an act that gets rid of gerrymandering, which pretty much is the reason why we can't get anything passed, because a small minority has such a huge influence in the legislative process, and that's what really hurt Barack Obama in trying to institute a lot of his policies, that gerrymandering. So he's trying to get rid of that. He's trying to just, again, he uses equity a lot in the plan, and it's really trying to get rid of just all what you're saying, you know, and trying to kind of create a closer gap, you know. But you know,
and it's like I saw that he just passed directive bill saying that he wanted to do something with the privatization of jails or
Yeah, yeah.
federal jails or
He's trying
something like that.
yeah, he's trying to get out of private prisons. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So after I watched 13th, I just wanted to follow these companies where they are operating. And guess where they are? They're
Where?
here.
Oh,
They're in
no
UK.
way.
Yeah, they have been operating here since 1992, 1993. That is what I'm saying. Like people doesn't understand anything. They really look to the US like, oh, things are very bad there. Wait, they are worse here in
Mm.
terms of like numbers. They're worse, but there is no acknowledgement. So they're operating here. After 13 came through, they changed their name on
Oh,
of
way.
the company. Yeah.
I,
So it's more difficult to trace that. And they have been operating here. In the UK, there is a law, it's a law or like, yeah, I think it's like a law. It's called Stop and Search. Most of the people that is affected, who is Black people, other minorities, higher number Black people, second number is mixed heritage, which again is like Black people
mhm.
following, and they are the ones that they are populating the prisons. So they may stop making money there, but they are going to continue making money here because I think there was an inauguration of like another super or like mega, how you call it, mega jail or mega prison here in the UK. And I think the numbers were like 2,000, 3,000. It's not that the population is different, but it's still like super big um, platforms, you know?
It,
So,
I want you to watch Roland Martin. Watch Roland Martin's segment on the Biden's trying to get rid of power. I'm gonna send it to you. You'll really enjoy it. Really
okay.
great debate amongst different people. But so we got so we've acknowledged that these inequities, right? You know, they were intentional. We've acknowledged that racism is about power. We've acknowledged that, you know, if we don't know where we come from, it's hard for us to get this political power. It's hard for us to get this economic power. And those also systems in place that kind of keep us from doing that, right? Like you were saying, Black American, like where can you trace that to? You know, it's really hard to do that, and that has its disadvantages. He talked about how when certain different immigrants, they will come into the country, they would be educated, they would be like people with degrees coming in to take part in the capitalism, and because of that, you know, colorblind, they'll be like, well, look, you know, people are coming in this country and you still can't do it, you know. And then the media is still pushing that narrative that, you know, Black people are always insubordinate. Subordinate,
yeah.
insubordinate, excuse me.
And
Go ahead.
that's a good point because my family is immigrants from Haiti, and they went to the US. I think like at least my family had the family structure, the sense of community, and also access to education in Haiti. If you compare someone, you know, from, and that was like my family in Haiti. You can have like people in Haiti that they are like poorer, so it's more difficult to balance out. But I think if you see the comparison that they do with African American, the trauma is different.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
trauma is different,
Almost
and that really
matters.
generates, you know, like certain different outcomes that is different from Haiti. It's just different.
Yeah.
So you cannot really compare. You can't.
It's not fair. It's not fair.
No fair at all.
I love it. I love it. So as we close, I want us to end on where it says white ice is colder. And I'm gonna just keep talking about Pan-Africanism, you know, and just
Yeah.
I feel like that is the solution. You know, if we have a equitable Pan-African mindset, you know, we are providing people what they need, but we're listening. You know, we we are really, really being intentional. Puerto Rico, they just passed a state of emergency because of their
hurricane.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was the hurricane, right?
Right. Because of, well, they've been through the hurricane, but it was also because of the domestic violence issues that they have there. So apparently, a woman and a transgender woman, like I think 2 die a week or something like that, or every 2 weeks. Like it's really bad, and it was so bad that the organization that was pushing the new governor, they were saying like this needs to be a part of your agenda. They organized, they had a coalition, and he declared a state of emergency for that. And he also instituted it in the educational program so they can know that this is an issue and we need to teach this. And it was really impactful, very, very impactful. And I think that is the goal. We have to organize, right? I think what Stacey Abrams did with Atlanta, organize and educate people on the facts. Like, I love that you started off with just an inaccuracy, your ability to really pay attention to detail. I think that skill is needed in any impoverished neighborhood. We need leaders like you and people that are going to listen like me to get people to understand that, if you have the access, you have the knowledge, and we can try to put you on the right road. We can, get you where you need to be and provide that liberation and, allow you to still be yourself. Any closing thoughts for you, Laura?
I would say like this has been only chapter 1. It has not even been the whole book, but I think it's really interesting. I'm looking forward to see the tools that is going to provide for those problems that we have explored today. And I really think one thing is like he doesn't use the word Pan-Africanism.
Right.
And that is very interesting because I think Pan-Africanism exists in the diaspora, but no in the continent. And we need to be very aware that what we are seeking maybe never will take place because it's not going to happen that way. But it's very important for us as a community to really have the dialogue and to really continue raising awareness and having conversations where, it's so interesting because you can give your point of view for what is happening in the US, and we can contrast with what is happening in Europe or in the UK, and it's exactly the same. It is the same.
Yeah, and that's the whole part of the conversation. So I think we definitely got to the goal. We talked about chapter 1, not chapter 2, because we're not there yet. But I love just hearing your family story, and thank you for being vulnerable, and I really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to more discussions.
All right, me too. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right, y'all. Well, we peacing out. Thank you. We'll see y'all. We're going to be going over chapter 2 and maybe chapter 3 all in one. It's a lot. As you say, this was an hour, so we can't be on the podcast for 3 hours. So we're going to cut it up next time. But definitely appreciate you all staying with us. Peace out. Laura, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at miss.legros. That's my whole name. Or maybe Clubhouse, if you can catch me there. But.
As you can tell, she doesn't want you to follow her. She's trying to be like very, very inconspicuous. So, but if you love this knowledge, please follow her. She has an amazing blog where she just talks about her life in the UK. She's amazing. I love it. Peace out, y'all.